When I was younger, I didn't fully understand why things were the way they were. But one moment stands out in my mind, a moment that changed everything. My mother once told me, "If I had known about your developmental disorder, I wouldn't have had you. You're an unnecessary presence in our family." Hearing those words shattered my world. My heart felt like it had stopped, and the world around me turned completely dark. It was a weight I carried for years. It wasn't long after that my father announced, "Let's start fresh. A new life begins for the three of us." He said this loud and clear, sticking his head out the window of the car, right in front of our grandparents' empty house. And then they drove away. My parents left me behind, laughing as they sped off, leaving me standing there, frozen. I was just 9 years old at the time, and all I could do was watch the car disappear, feeling completely abandoned. I'm Grace, and I'm 24 now. I have a twin brother, Daniel. We used to live together with our parents, but it's been over 9 years since we've been apart. The reason is tied to the past we both shared, a past I can't easily forget. Our family wasn't anything out of the ordinary. My father had a regular office job, and my mother worked part-time while also managing the house. Like any other family, we lived a simple life. But things started to change once we reached elementary school. That's when my brother's talents began to shine. He was naturally good at school, always expected to get perfect scores, and teachers couldn't stop praising him. "You're amazing, Daniel. Another perfect score. You're so talented and will go far in life," my mother would say with a proud smile, while my father would laugh, agreeing. He might become a scholar, a doctor, or even an athlete. He'll never have to worry about money. My brother was their pride, and it was clear to everyone. But me, I struggled. I couldn't focus in class. The sounds of chairs moving, the click of mechanical pencils, and other distractions made it hard for me to concentrate. I would get scolded regularly by teachers, and instead of being helped, I was often ignored. As the years went by, my parents seemed to shower all their attention on Daniel. His favorite foods were always on the table. He was the one who went out with them for fun, and if he wanted something, it was always granted. Meanwhile, I was left to fend for myself, neglected in a way that was hard for me to express. If I had been able to talk to someone back then, perhaps things could have changed. But I couldn't. I struggled to speak, to put my thoughts into words. I couldn't explain how I felt or why I was struggling. Even as an adult, I still find it hard to communicate clearly. Sometimes, when I think I'm answering a question or giving a response, I end up saying something irrelevant, missing the point completely. I've gotten better, but the struggle never really goes away. According to my mother, I was born with a mild developmental disorder. While I've grown and learned more over the years, I still face difficulties that others might not understand. As a child, I was often difficult to handle. But just because I was different doesn't mean I deserved to be neglected. I was still growing, still learning, and still deserving of love and care, just like anyone else. My parents, however, didn't see it that way. They would often look down on me, comparing me to my brother, who they saw as perfect in every way. I could have stood up for myself and tried to defend my worth, but back then, my parents held all the power. I couldn't argue with them. So, I kept quiet. I smiled, even when it hurt, and didn't fight back. As I got older, my relationship with my brother started to change too. When we were younger, we were close. But as he grew, he became more distant. He didn't understand me anymore. "Don't talk to me at school," he'd say. "It's good we don't look alike." I wouldn't want anyone to think we're related. His words hurt, but I couldn't say anything back. He saw me as nothing more than a burden. He began to ignore me completely, and the kindness that once existed between us faded away. My parents never noticed how Daniel treated me. They never cared, and they certainly never paid attention to the way they treated me either. Slowly, over time, I became invisible to them. No more attention, no more affection. I was just there. Now, as I reflect on the past, I realize how much it shaped me. It's been a long road, but I'm learning to stand on my own. Even though I was neglected, misunderstood, and often overlooked, I've come to understand that I deserve better. I am not just a side character in someone else's story. I'm the author of my own life, and it's time for me to write a new chapter. My days were reduced to just waiting for the rare moments when I would receive any attention, and even then it was minimal. Special occasions like birthdays and Christmas felt the same. My parents would take my brother out to eat, but for me, there was nothing special. No birthday cake, no treats, no gifts. Instead, I would get a supermarket meal, pre-packaged and discounted. I was left alone, stuck with the task of house-sitting while my brother enjoyed the attention. Even during the New Year celebrations, it was no different. My father would tell me, "You stay in your room. I can't concentrate with you around." So, my New Year's celebration consisted of eating snacks in my room, listening to the sounds of laughter and cheer from the living room, and feeling more isolated than ever. When it came to study materials, my parents would dismiss me completely. "You don't need any study materials. What's the point? You can't do anything anyway." They said it so matter-of-factly, as if I didn't matter. Only my brother was given a desk, educational materials, and the chance to succeed. I felt defeated. With no encouragement at home, my grades began to drop, and I lost all motivation to study. It felt like I had no place, not at school, not at home. But there were two people I could rely on, two adults who treated me with kindness, my grandparents. They lived far away, over 4 hours by car, so I couldn't see them often. But twice a year, during the summer and holiday breaks, I was allowed to go visit them. The rule was simple. I wasn't allowed to speak. Still, those trips meant everything to me. Their house was nestled in beautiful countryside, far removed from the hustle and bustle of the city. To my brother and parents, it might have seemed boring, but to me, it was a paradise. The vibrant colors of nature fascinated me, and while my brother buried himself in his studies, I would sit with my colored pencils and draw. I would sketch what I saw in the countryside, trying to capture the beauty on paper. My brother would scoff, and my parents would glance at my drawings with disdain, but my grandparents were different. They hung my simple drawings on the refrigerator, praising them. "What a beautiful sunset you've drawn," they would say, and at that moment, I felt understood. Not because my art was amazing, but because they saw the effort I put into expressing myself, even if I couldn't find the words. They loved my brother, of course, but they didn't treat me any differently. They treated us both the same, showing love equally. Those rare visits with my grandparents were my emotional refuge, the only time I felt truly seen and valued. Then, when we were 9 years old, just as spring break began, my parents shocked us with an unexpected announcement. "We've sold our apartment," my father declared. My brother laughed mockingly. "You're really stupid. It's been sold. A new life awaits us in a new house." I was confused. If the house is sold, where are we going to live? What about school? When are we moving? My questions were met with anger from my father. "Shut up. Your questions are always pointless. We've been preparing for this for a long time. Pack your things quickly." I hadn't noticed it until then, but the living room was already packed up. I had been so isolated in my room that I hadn't seen the gradual disappearance of things around the house. Panicking, I held back tears as I quickly packed my things into cardboard boxes. But I could only take a few toys and the bare minimum of clothes. Most of what I owned were things I had brought home from school, and I hastily packed them up, trying to stay calm. "I'm ready," I said, my voice barely a whisper, as I stood with my school bag. "Everything's packed." But my father wasn't interested in my efforts. "Forget about your report cards. Just get in the car quickly," he snapped, tossing my box roughly into the trunk. The harshness of the moment stung, but I didn't protest. There was no point. My life felt like it was being packed up, discarded, and tossed away, just like the things in that box. I climbed into the car, holding my school bag tightly. Something felt different, though. My brother Daniel, who always sat next to me, was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Daniel?" I asked, feeling confused. "It can't just be the three of us going, right? Aren't we missing something?" My mother shot me a sharp look. "You're supposed to be quiet in the car," she snapped. I fell silent, my confusion only growing. "It's hard to understand you," she muttered. "We gave your brother some pocket money and let him go out to play. Be quiet if you understand." I didn't know what to think. As I stared out of the car window, I absent-mindedly watched the trees, their flowers blooming beautifully. But then, a small spark of hope flickered in my heart. Maybe, just like in the past when they took only Daniel out, this time they were taking me somewhere fun. Maybe this was their way of surprising me with the move. I smiled to myself, the excitement growing. My parents were talking softly to each other, but I didn't pay attention. I was too caught up in the idea that this trip could be something special for me. I never imagined that this happiness would soon be replaced with betrayal. Eventually, I fell asleep. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by my mother's loud voice. "Wake up, take your school bag, and get out of the car." Groggy and disoriented, I stepped out of the car. And then I froze, my heart skipping a beat. We were in front of my grandparents' house, the house I loved so much. "Yay, Grandma, Grandpa," I said, rushing to the door with excitement. But when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. "Mom, I can't get in," I said, confused. "Oh, it's a weekday today," my mother replied dismissively. "They're probably still at work. I just called them. They'll be back soon. See you." She didn't even look at me as she grabbed my luggage and tossed it in front of the door. She turned right back to the car without a second glance. "Wait. Where are you going?" I called out, feeling the panic rising in my chest. "Mom, Dad, where are you going?" My mother shook me off like it was nothing. "Your brother got into a famous private elementary school. It guarantees that he'll progress through every grade. He's already set to transfer there next term. We sold the apartment to pay for his tuition, and we're moving to a new house for him. But having you around only distracts him. It also adds extra food costs." She paused, looking at me with a cold expression. "This is your chance to stay here. Just stay with your grandparents." "Wait, what's going on? Am I changing schools? Am I going to a different school?" My mind was spinning. "That's exactly what annoys me about you," my mother snapped, raising her voice. "You're always causing trouble. You're a burden to me. Your grades are terrible, your appearance is below average, and you can't even have a proper conversation. Your brother is such a good kid. Why do you always make things difficult?" Her words felt like a slap, leaving me speechless. I could barely breathe, much less find the right words to respond. "Did I do something bad?" I asked quietly, almost choking on the words. "If I did, I'm sorry. I don't need your apologies. They're just empty words." My mother's voice was sharp. "If I had known about your developmental disorder, I never would have had you. You're an unnecessary burden on our family." When she said this, it felt like the ground beneath me had vanished. I was overwhelmed by the weight of her words. My world went completely dark. "We're leaving now. A new life begins for the three of us," my father said loudly, sticking his head out of the car window. His voice was final, unyielding. I stood there, frozen, desperate to stop them, to make them see me, to make them understand. "Don't go," I pleaded. "Please don't leave me behind. Dad, Mom, am I such a bad child?" My mind was a whirlwind, and the words just wouldn't come out right. I couldn't express how much this hurt, how much I needed them to stay. As I struggled to speak, my mother glanced at me coldly and turned toward the car. "Sorry to keep you waiting," she said. "Since we're here, we'll buy a cake from the bakery and take it home to Daniel. You can eat it with him." All I could do was stand there, staring, as they drove away without a second thought. "Grace, are you okay?" I heard a voice, soft and kind. I turned to see my grandparents standing in front of me, their faces filled with concern. By the time I realized what had happened, it had already gotten dark. My world felt so empty. I had been abandoned again, left behind as if I didn't matter. But at that moment, as I looked into my grandparents' worried eyes, I realized that at least someone cared. Even if my parents had cast me aside, they were still here, and that small comfort was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. While I waited for my grandparents to come back, I must have fallen asleep without even realizing it. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. My grandfather noticed right away. "Your hands are cold, and your face is so pale," he said, wrapping me in his jumper. Gently, He lifted me onto his back and carried me to a warm room. I could feel the warmth starting to spread through me, but my mind was still too clouded to understand everything. My grandparents were moving quickly around the house, speaking to each other in tones that were full of concern and anger. "How long has Grace been waiting out there?" they exclaimed when they saw the message on their phones at work. They were shocked to find out what had happened. The message simply read, "We've left Grace in front of the house. Please take care of her." My grandparents rushed home immediately. If they hadn't found me when they did, I don't even want to imagine what could have happened. At that time, my grandfather worked as a craftsman and my grandmother worked tirelessly at a local restaurant. They were both always so busy. Yet, my parents didn't let them know in advance what was going on. They sent that brief message, and that was it. No further explanation, no concern for how I was doing. The realization that my parents didn't care enough to inform my grandparents ahead of time hit me like a cold wave, reminding me of how insignificant I was to them. As I sipped the hot milk my grandmother gave me, I felt the warmth seep into my chest. It calmed my racing thoughts, and I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. My grandmother gently stroked my back, offering comfort as I cried. Meanwhile, my grandfather stood up abruptly and called my father. The conversation grew heated, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. Eventually, he slammed the phone down, his anger boiling over. "Grace, I spoke with your father, but it seems we can't communicate properly," he said, his voice softening as he turned to me. "Can you tell me what happened?" Tears streamed down my face as I tried to explain everything that had led up to this moment. My words were jumbled and scattered, my emotions making it hard to speak clearly. But my grandparents listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. I finally choked out the words. They said I'm an unnecessary existence because I have a developmental disorder. They said it would have been better if I had never been born. Mom and Dad want to create a new family with Daniel. As I spoke, I felt the weight of those harsh words pressing down on me. But then, without warning, I was wrapped in a tight, comforting embrace by my grandmother. "What are you talking about?" she said softly. "You are a wonderful child, no matter what anyone says. You are irreplaceable to us. We're so happy you were born." Her words were like a balm to my broken heart. "People's worth isn't measured by intelligence or appearance," she continued, her voice steady. "Your grandfather and I are just ordinary people. We didn't attend prestigious schools, but we lived our lives doing what we loved. You may not be great at academics, but you have a rare talent for sensitivity and expression. That's something no one else has. That's uniquely yours." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and the tears started to flow again, but this time they weren't born from sadness. My grandparents had shown me something I had forgotten, that I had worth, that I wasn't just a burden. "There are no adults here to make you feel sad anymore. You don't have to worry," my grandfather added, rubbing my head gently. "I'm sorry we didn't notice it sooner. You've been doing your best." I cried in their arms, overwhelmed with emotion, but it was different now. Their love and support helped me begin to heal. From that moment on, I began living with my grandparents. They enrolled me in a small, local elementary school where the teachers were kind and understanding. One of them, in particular, became the first person, aside from my grandparents, who understood me. Because the school was in a rural area with only a few students, the teachers were able to implement a personalized educational program that took into account my unique characteristics. They helped me move through lessons at my own pace, which made all the difference. As a result, my grades, which had once been poor, began to improve. I struggled with communication, but slowly I came to accept that my uniqueness was not something to be ashamed of. I started to make friends, and I began to live a much more peaceful, balanced life, both mentally and physically. I even started to find things I truly wanted to do, and over time, I found my passions. 14 years passed, and during all that time, I never heard from my parents or my brother. Their addresses and phone numbers changed, and slowly, their faces faded from my memory. I had moved on with my life, found a new family with my grandparents, and built a future for myself. But then, one day, it all came crashing back. "Open the door," You're in there, aren't you? The sound of someone banging violently on the door shattered the peaceful calm of the early morning. My grandparents had already woken up, but I froze, unsure of what was happening. My heart raced as the noise grew louder, each thud more urgent than the last. I had no idea who it was, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was about to happen would change everything again. I woke up groggy, disoriented, and unsure of what was going on. My grandfather's angry voice cut through the fog in my mind. After leaving your daughter for over a decade, what do you want now? His tone made me freeze. Slowly, I walked toward the entrance, confusion clouding my thoughts. When I stepped outside, my eyes widened in shock. There, standing in front of me, was the woman who had given birth to me, but she didn't look anything like the mother I remembered. The woman in front of me looked tired and worn out, as if life had taken its toll. Beside her stood a man who looked different too. The once slim figure of my father had given way to a man with a bulging belly. They smiled, reaching out their hands toward me, trying to act friendly. I stiffened. My eyes narrowed. If you are my parents, why are you here? Don't act like we're strangers. We came to talk, my mother said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. Yes, we know the workshop is doing well now. Your dad's getting older, and as both a manager and craftsman, he's reaching his limits. So, we've come back. I thought I'd take over the business. We also heard that our lovely daughter is set to inherit from him, and we think that should be ours to take. My grandfather snorted in disbelief at their words, his voice full of disdain. Oh, so you've come back for the leftovers and to take over the business? How presumptuous. An amateur with no understanding of glass artistry wanted to take over our workshop. We've already decided who our successor will be, and it's Grace. She will take over. She's a genius. My father's face twisted with disbelief. What? This child? She can't do anything, he scoffed. Before I could react, my grandmother threw a newspaper at his face. What are you doing? Look inside, you fool, she said, pointing to the paper with her finger. My father flipped through the pages quickly, his eyes growing wide as he alternated between looking at me and the article in shock. It was an article from a recent interview, young glass artisan from a local workshop to the world. The headline blared across the page. When I was in middle school, I started to take an interest in my grandfather's work. At first, I was just an assistant in his workshop, but as time went on, I became more involved. Eventually, my grandfather recognized my talent and took me on as an apprentice. I was fascinated by the idea of capturing the beauty of nature through glass, and over the years, my passion grew. A few years ago, I completed a piece that had been my dream to create, and after I began selling it, it gained popularity on social media. Quickly, I became known as a prominent glass artisan. Now, I even receive orders from restaurants and stores abroad. We expanded the workshop and started online sales. You are indeed our daughter, my father said, his voice now laced with exaggerated praise. Not like that useless, timid son. I blinked in confusion. Useless, timid? Those words were so opposite to the brother I remembered. I turned to my mother, trying to make sense of what she was saying. She glared at me. Just listen. That useless Daniel, she began, speaking with a strange excitement. He graduated from university and got a job at a top company. Everything was going well at first. But after years of being praised as perfect, he became arrogant and fragile. Just a little scolding and he quit his job. Can you believe it? He quit after just a year. Now, he mostly stays in his room. He barely leaves except for the bathroom or shower. We had to quit our jobs because of him. I was stunned. This was not the brother I remembered. The brother who once seemed so promising, so full of potential. It was hard to reconcile this version of him with the one I once knew. Hey, Dad, my father said, shifting the conversation. Forget the inheritance for a moment. You have money, right? Can't you take care of us three? Or at least just us two? My grandfather stared at him, incredulous. Do you two only care about yourselves? Daniel's still young. He'll figure something out. He's not a child anymore. But for us, it's impossible to find new jobs at our age. Hey, Dad, listen to your loving son's request, my father persisted. My grandfather, dumbfounded, sighed deeply and walked back into the house. As I stood there in shock, my mother turned to me, her eyes bloodshot and tired. You should come live with us, too, right? Oh, wait. You don't understand what we're talking about. She spoke in a tone that made my heart sink. All you have to do is nod along. My father nodded in agreement, but his expression was blank. I felt my blood run cold. I could barely process the words that came next. Why do I have to live with strangers? I asked, my voice trembling but firm. We are your real parents. My mother's voice was harsh, her anger rising. We raised you. I stared at them, trying to make sense of the twisted version of my family that had reappeared after all these years. I had been left behind, forgotten, and now they wanted to pick up where they had left off as if no time had passed. As if all the pain they had caused didn't matter. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the people who had so easily discarded me once before, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to be pushed around again. When I was a child living with my parents, I never felt truly cared for. It was as if I barely existed in their world. They didn't see me, and they certainly didn't make me feel loved. It was my grandparents and my teachers who were the ones to raise me, to nurture me, to guide me when I had no one else. They were the ones who truly cared for me when my parents couldn't or wouldn't. As I stood there, facing my biological parents, I felt nothing but a cold distance. I looked at them, and they seemed like strangers. I had no memories of them caring for me, no recollection of the warmth and affection that parents should show their children. They had abandoned me when I was just 9 years old. You may be my parents by law, I said, my voice calm yet firm, but I have no memory of that. I can't live with strangers. The silence in the room was thick as I waited for their response, but none came. My grandparents, who had always been my true family, didn't say anything either, but their quiet presence made me feel supported. The look on their faces, their silence, told me all I needed to know. They were on my side, as always. My father, clearly frustrated, looked at my grandfather and muttered, "Don't you think that's a terrible thing to say, Dad? Say something." My grandfather simply smiled, his calmness a stark contrast to my father's mounting anger. My father pressed on, his voice rising, "If you want me to, I'll say something too. It's strange to say you raised Grace when you abandoned her at 9. No, not about me," my father said, stumbling over his words. "Say something to Grace. Say something to your grandfather. Say something to her." My grandfather, undisturbed by the tension, chuckled softly. "Don't abandon us now," he said, his tone light. Frustrated and clearly losing his composure, my father tried again. "Hey, Dad, enough already." My grandfather interrupted with a stern voice that rang through the room. His words were final, and they cut through the chaos. "Why would you say such spoiled things now?" The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and my parents froze. In the quiet that followed, my grandmother hurried off to the kitchen. When she returned, she held a large bag in her hand. "This is perfect," she said with a steady voice. "Now, get out. You bad luck." With that, my grandmother began tossing salt at my mother's face. My mother cried out, "Ouch. What is this?" "This salt," my grandmother explained calmly, "is for cooking. Parents who abandon their children are the epitome of bad luck." She continued to throw the salt, her motion unhurried and deliberate. "Go back already," my grandmother shouted. "I'll keep throwing salt until you leave. We have plenty of it, so be prepared." Beside her, my grandfather stood, holding a new bag of salt. He joined in, tossing the salt with force, hitting my parents directly in the face. "Hey, Dad. Mom, please stop." My parents cried, their voices pleading, but my grandparents didn't stop. They continued their silent assault, their faces set in determination. "Go back already. Never come back," they yelled. My parents, desperate and confused, clung to my hand, begging me, "Are you going to abandon your parents? We're drowning in debt. We're struggling to survive. Shouldn't family help us out?" I pulled my hand free from their grip, my voice steady but cold. My family is only my grandparents, I replied, my words sharp. With one firm motion, I took the bag of salt from my grandmother and emptied its contents over my parents. This moment, this act felt decisive. It was my way of severing the final ties that had held me to them. Goodbye forever, I said, watching as they recoiled in shock, their faces filled with disbelief. Without another word, they fled the house, running away as if they had nothing left to hold on to. As time passed, my brother appeared at our workshop. It turned out that when my parents had fled, the debt collectors had been chasing them, and in the chaos, they had left Daniel behind. The debt collectors came to our house and evicted my brother, leaving him distraught and alone. The police took him in, and when they contacted our grandparents as his only remaining relatives, my grandfather proposed a solution. One who does not work does not eat, he said matter-of-factly. If you work hard and help out in the workshop, we'll provide you with a place to live and meals. What do you say? To my surprise, my brother agreed without hesitation. Despite his earlier success, the weight of reality had knocked him down. He started working in the workshop, but it was clear he was still unpolished. My grandfather didn't sugarcoat things. He often scolded Daniel, pushing him to do better, to improve. But as always, my grandfather's guidance was steady, and under his watchful eye, Daniel slowly began to learn the value of hard work. It was a new beginning for him, but one that would take time and patience. As time went on, my brother began to change. At first, he was just a worker in the workshop, struggling to find his place. But soon, he started showing talent in areas like online sales and accounting. His skills became invaluable to the workshop, and he quickly became indispensable. Over time, my brother, who had grown up so differently, began to reflect on his past actions. He started to feel ashamed of how he had treated me before, and he began to acknowledge my abilities. It was a strange feeling, and I can't say we've fully reconciled yet, but it's both delightful and a bit embarrassing to see him treating me kindly now. I never expected this change, but it's a step forward, even if it's just the beginning of a new understanding between us. Just when it seemed like my brother was finding his place and being recognized for his efforts, something unexpected happened. Our parents reached out to him as if nothing had changed. "Daniel, where are you? What are you doing? It's getting dangerous here. We might end up on a fishing boat. Please help us," they pleaded. Their message focused entirely on their own problems, completely ignoring what they had done to my brother in the past and how they had left him behind without a second thought. It was too much for Daniel. He had finally started to make a life for himself, and their selfishness was the last straw. Without hesitation, he changed all his phone numbers and email addresses, cutting off all means of contact with them. It was his way of protecting himself from their constant chaos. I often wonder if they've ended up working on a fishing boat, as they mentioned, but I have no desire to find out. In truth, both my brother and I felt a great sense of relief after severing ties with our parents. We no longer had to worry about their unpredictable and selfish behavior. Instead, we could focus on building our own lives. Now, the dinner table is surrounded by people who truly care for us. My grandparents, my brother, and I may not have fancy dishes, but there's something so comforting about the warmth we share. The food might not be extravagant, but there's mashed potatoes made by my grandmother and a slightly misshapen dish made by my brother. My grandfather enjoys his beer from a glass that I made, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm surrounded by love and stability. It's a simple life, but it's a life I never had as a child, and for the first time, I'm experiencing a happiness I thought was beyond my reach. I've found a sense of peace that I never knew before, and it's all thanks to the people who truly care about me.
The petty family feud started with my brother-in-law's wife picking a fight with me. Up until this point, there haven't been any issues. I've just been living peacefully with my in-laws. I'm Amelia, a 35-year-old housewife married for 3 years. My husband Mason is a year older than me and currently runs his father's company, which is a well-respected local business founded by his father. I stay out of the company's business as I am studying law for the future. My relationship with my in-laws is good. I moved in with them right after getting married. My father-in-law hardly goes to the office now, enjoying socializing with friends, while my mother-in-law works all day in accounting at the company, so they really appreciate my handling of all the housework. Mason has an older sister who is 3 years his senior and works at their father's company with her husband. He also has a younger brother, 2 years his junior, who works at a friend's company and has moved out. Since I had little interaction with them, there were no issues. The peace was disrupted when Mason's brother Fabian married 27-year-old Harper. She was already pregnant at the time of the marriage and gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, 2 months later. In contrast, Mason and I don't have children. Only my in-laws, Mason's sister, my husband and I know this, but the issue lies with Mason. However, Harper, who doesn't know this, started saying that their family is more suitable to inherit the company. Initially, Harper asked me, "You're already past 30 and still don't have kids. Why is that?" Honestly, I've been fed up with people asking "no kids yet," or saying, "It's your duty as the eldest son's wife to bear an heir." Of course, I married Mason knowing we couldn't have children, so I just laughed off such comments. As usual, I vaguely answered Harper, "Well, that's something only God can decide." Then she bluntly said, "Doesn't that mean you're defective as a woman and a wife? Unlike you, I've given birth to both a boy and a girl, so don't you think our family should be the successor?" She even pressured my husband. "Fabian also thinks it's unfair for Mason to take over the company. Can't you talk to Mason about handing over his position to my husband?" I replied, "That's not something I should interfere in. If you're so keen on succeeding the company, you should discuss it directly with our father-in-law. Though Mason is currently in charge, the company's CEO is still his father." I thought talking to the father-in-law might change things, but Harper retorted, "That's why I'm asking you." Apparently Fabian was quite rebellious when younger, leading to a pretty bad reputation locally. According to Harper, his parents know this, so it's unlikely they'd choose him as a successor. She insisted, "That's why I'm asking you. Even if Mason takes over, there's no next generation to follow, right? It'd be better if Fabian became the president from the start." I grew increasingly angry and voiced my opinion strongly to Harper. She looked annoyed and snapped, "Fine, just watch me." It seemed like she was plotting something. Over the weekend, Harper and Fabian suddenly showed up with their twins. Since they hadn't visited much after the birth, everyone exclaimed, "How adorable! Do they look like me? Look at their eyes," said the grandparents. Though honestly, they didn't resemble the grandfather. The in-laws were overjoyed. Fabian, grinning foolishly, was buttering up, saying, "Right, they'll probably grow up to be great kids just like Grandpa. Your genes are amazing." Harper also spoke to the twins. "Look, here's Grandpa and Grandma. They're going to love you a lot." Ah, now I understand their strategy. It is indeed quicker to use the grandchildren's trump card than to fix Fabian's tarnished reputation. But I think, or rather I am sure, that their efforts are in vain. While I thought this, Harper looked at me and smirked. "I want to raise these children to be as respectable as you. Can I bring them here often to show them your admirable ways?" she said sweetly to her father-in-law. I thought it's ridiculous to show this to infants, but the father-in-law was surprisingly happy and agreed readily. Then, getting carried away, Fabian asked in a wheedling tone, "Dad, we're really struggling financially now with 2 kids all of a sudden. My current job pays poorly. Could you help us out a bit for your adorable grandchildren?" The grandfather, smitten with the twins, agreed to give a monthly allowance of $1,000. My mother-in-law and Mason watched with complex expressions. Later, my mother-in-law told me that she and my sister-in-law had to apologize a lot for Fabian's past misdeeds. The diligent and hard-working sister-in-law, who is the opposite of Harper and Fabian, strongly opposed their marriage, and the mother-in-law regretted not listening to her. "It's unthinkable that couple could raise their kids properly, and I'm afraid they're going to dump the twins on us," she said. "Indeed," I agreed. "Amelia, this is no time to be relaxed. If they bring the twins over on weekdays, you'll be the one looking after them," she added. "That's right. I've never raised children, so there's no way I could properly care for babies just a few months old. But surely Harper wouldn't leave her twins with someone like me," I thought. "Since you probably can't have kids anymore, I'll let you participate," Harper told me. A few days later, in the afternoon, Harper brought the roughly half-year-old babies to our house and tried to leave by herself. "Hey, that's incredibly irresponsible. What if something happens to these kids?" I shouted in anger. Harper replied cheerfully, "If anything happens, I'll blame it all on you. Poor mother to have such a daughter-in-law." Hearing that, I completely lost my temper. "Using your own children for your and your husband's schemes? Enough is enough," I burst out. "What's scheming? Watch how you talk. Isn't it sad for your mother-in-law and father-in-law having an infertile woman like you as the eldest son's wife, leading to the end of the company in the next generation?" she asked with a smirk. "Why do you assume it'll end?" I inquired. "What are you talking about? Since the eldest son, Mason, doesn't have kids, there won't be a next generation once he becomes the president," she explained. "Someone else will become the president," I replied. "I won't let that happen," Harper objected. After yelling that, she actually left the two babies behind and walked out. What should I do? My mother-in-law is super busy with the company's year-end accounting. Should I contact my husband? But Mason has zero experience with child-rearing too, and he has apologized many times for the fact that I can't get pregnant because of him. Should I really discuss the baby situation with him? While I was pondering, the two babies started crying almost simultaneously. The father-in-law tried to soothe them but couldn't. Right, my sister-in-law has experience with child-rearing. Remembering this, I quickly contacted her, and she came right over. At 10 p.m., a drunken Harper was greeted by me, my husband, the in-laws, and her husband. My sister-in-law was in another room making sure the twins didn't wake up. "What's going on? Why is everyone here?" Harper was visibly shaken. The mother-in-law asked, "Why did you leave the children for 7 hours?" "Oh, that. Amelia insisted on taking care of them and kicked me out." "How awful, right?" she stated. Mason responded to Harper's smooth lie. "I heard all your conversation with Amelia this afternoon. You really talked down my wife." Actually, Mason had been troubled by Harper's recent behavior and had installed listening devices after her last visit. Harper was momentarily flustered but then said, "Isn't it the truth? The eldest son's wife can't even have children." "Quiet." That's when the mother-in-law raised her voice. "The fact that these two don't have children is something my husband and I have already accepted. It's none of your business," she uttered. "Before marrying, Mason and I had a bridal check at the hospital to see if we could conceive. That's when it was discovered that Mason had a congenital issue preventing us from having children." The mother-in-law cried, apologizing for giving birth to Mason just like that. That's why she protected me from Harper's abusive words, and she kept the fact that Mason was the cause a secret. Her kindness truly touched me. After being scolded by the mother-in-law, Harper, unable to grasp the situation, turned to plead with the father-in-law. "But we have children. To ensure the company's continuation, the next generation's successor is necessary, right?" Then the father-in-law calmly replied, "We haven't thought that far. Whoever becomes the next president can decide. Choosing a successor just because they have children is absurd." Hearing this, Harper and Fabian's expressions changed. "So does that mean Mason is the next president?" Fabian almost shrieked. The father-in-law responded, "No, I'm going to ask his sister to take over. We decided that before he got married." The brother-in-law couple's face looked as if they had been hit by a bullet. "But the sister is a woman," Fabian managed to say. The father-in-law cut him off. "She has always been excellent academically and popular. Plus, you might not know this, but she had to apologize for your misdeeds. Since then, she's been known locally as polite and dependable." Next to the stunned brother-in-law, Harper turned her anger towards me. "You knew about this, didn't you? Why didn't you tell me?" she questioned. "What? I did say someone else will become the president. I'm not part of their company, so I can't say more than that," I replied. Then Mason chimed in. "The $1,000 we were giving you was from my pocket. We couldn't use the company's money, and I wanted my dad to enjoy his salary and pension. Plus, I do love my nephew and niece, but after discussing with Dad and my sister, we've decided to stop it from now on." Hearing this, both Harper and Fabian went pale. "What? That's a problem. We're spending so much on childcare," they resented. Such excuses didn't work with my husband. "What are you talking about? We felt sorry for you saying life was tough, so my sister and I discussed hiring Fabian in our company. When we brought in a private investigator to verify the information, We learned that you often left your children with their parents to go clubbing, he accused. At this revelation, the couple collapsed on the spot. Still, they desperately clung to their in-laws, but the father-in-law firmly stated, "We leave the company to Big Sister and her husband, and the housework to Mason and his wife. Please don't rely on us anymore." Harper began to cry, starting a family quarrel over nothing. Later, I heard that the brother-in-law couple were discussing divorce. Neither wants to pay alimony nor child support, and the brother-in-law is ranting, "They're not my kids, they don't look like me," while Harper left the kids with her parents and is refusing to let them see their father. Apparently, she doesn't want a DNA test. Whether or not the twins have the brother-in-law's blood, they will certainly not inherit the company, but it's a bit sad for the innocent twins. Mason, my husband, is set to become the president of the subsidiary, where my sister-in-law and her husband have been working since before our marriage. I will not be helping out at my mother-in-law's company, and am studying labor law to be useful in this new role. I'm also scheduled to be appointed as the executive vice president, and I'm determined to make it a better place for our employees to enjoy working. Marriage fraud refers to pretending to have intentions to marry only to deceive the other person and extract money or other benefits. This means my husband didn't commit marriage fraud against me, but I'm sure it's still a case of marriage fraud, and that includes my mother-in-law who conspired with him. I'm Ivy, 35 years old, and have been married for about 3 years. I recently got promoted to accounting manager in a mid-sized company and earn a decent salary. On the other hand, my husband Gabriel, 3 years my senior, works in sales at a small business. His salary was already low, and due to the recession it seems like his pay and bonuses were cut. I don't know the exact amount, but currently it seems to be about 2/3 of my salary. So most of the living expenses, including utilities, were coming out of my paycheck. Gabriel was enthusiastic about having children. He couldn't understand why I was hesitant. At the time of our marriage, several women at my workplace were pregnant or on maternity leave. This increased the workload for everyone in my department, including me, and I wanted to wait until things settled down. I had clearly communicated this to Gabriel when we got married. Taking maternity leave as a manager during such a busy time isn't ideal. "Ivy, you're responsible and admirable for thinking that way," Gabriel said, and agreed with me. Yet, just a month into our marriage, he started pressuring me to have a child. "It's totally fine, I'll take care of the grandchild, you just focus on your work." Even his mother, living a 15-minute walk from our new home, chimed in. Until then, my mother-in-law and I hadn't gotten along well. She seemed displeased that I didn't quit my job after getting married. "I don't care how good you are at your job, but slacking off and not taking care of my son is another matter. Even just being a proper housewife on the weekends would be nice, but you're always just lounging around no matter how tired. What kind of wife are you?" she often criticized, showing her favoritism towards her son. I was also surprised how she managed her finances, often going out or traveling since my father-in-law passed away. She probably got a nice inheritance from my father-in-law who passed away a few years ago. Her sudden offer to help with the grandchild in a sweet tone was suspicious. When I mentioned this to my husband, he got angry. "Don't you want to give my mom a chance to babysit her grandchild? She's just worried about you being over 30 and wants you to have a baby soon. Doubting her kindness is wrong," he yelled. Certainly that's true, but I couldn't shake off my doubts. However, I wanted children too, so I decided to accept my mother-in-law's kindness. My pregnancy went smoothly, without morning sickness, and I was able to take ample maternity leave. With strong encouragement from my mother-in-law, I returned to work 6 months after giving birth. Upon returning, I became an assistant manager with part-time hours, making about 2/3 of my previous salary. Yet it was comparable to other full-time women of my age, and I was grateful to continue working. My mother-in-law took great care of my child, even encouraging me to go back to full-time. My child became very attached to Grandma, which was a bit bittersweet, but I was thankful for the help. About a year later, the topic of living with my mother-in-law came up. She had hinted at it before, but I was too exhausted from work and taking care of my child and Gabriel to consider it. I thought living with her would not give me peace of mind, so I ignored it. However, she insisted that living together would be better for raising the child. I was mentally prepared to eventually live with my mother-in-law, but I was a bit shocked that the topic came up just 3 years into our marriage. However, considering all the help she's given with the child, I thought I should change my mindset. But I was surprised when I was called to my in-laws' house and heard the proposal from Gabriel and his mother. "This house is pretty old, right? We're thinking about rebuilding it," said my mother-in-law with a smile, looking right at me. Yes, it's indeed quite old and has some issues like leaks," I replied. "Right, and recently my back's been hurting. It's really inconvenient. I want to make it barrier-free, but a rebuild would cost several $100,000. I thought there was a decent inheritance when my father-in-law passed away, but neither Gabriel nor his mother mentioned anything about finances. Worried, I interrupted them while they were excitedly discussing the new house. "So, how are we going to finance this?" I inquired. "Oh, perhaps you will take out a mortgage in your name," my mother-in-law asked casually. "What?" I was very surprised. "You know Gabriel's salary is quite low. I asked a friend from a bank and she said it might not pass the credit check," my mother-in-law explained. "Excuse me?" I was incredulous. "Yeah, you know my low salary. Sorry about that," Gabriel added, almost apologetically. Wait a minute, what kind of frivolous attitude? I'm perplexed. That's going to be difficult for me," I continued to protest. "Why? We're family, right? We're going to live together after all," my mother-in-law argued. "That's true, but Ivy, you work at a stable, reputable company, and with your title as assistant accounting manager, they said you'd qualify for a considerable mortgage. We might as well build a nice house, right?" Gabriel chimed in. "But," I tried to argue, "what's the matter, Ivy? Mom's asking so nicely. Can't you just agree?" Gabriel pressed. "That's not so easy," I continued. "Don't worry, trust us," he insisted. I somehow managed to calm them both down by saying, "I'll think about it." With that, I ended the conversation. Sure, leaving my in-laws' 40-year-old house as is could be a problem, but taking out a full mortgage in my name for construction costs is just not common sense. Gabriel should understand that too, so why are the two of them conspiring like this? I figured out their plan when I overheard Gabriel's late-night phone call. When I got up to go to the bathroom, I heard him whispering in the dark living room. Words like construction costs and bank mortgage were audible. Listening closer, it seemed he was talking to his mother. "We're almost there. Ivy's about to say yes. Her only good point is earning money after all," Gabriel said. "Me? My only good point is earning money? What does that mean?" I was stunned and shocked. But then Gabriel uttered even more shocking words. "Yeah, having the child helps. If we get custody, it will be in our favor even after a divorce in court. There's no problem at all. Ivy's always prioritized work over childcare. We'll argue she's not fit as a mother." "The child? What about the child? It's in our court. What does this custody mean? They're planning to divorce me." My confusion grew, but then Gabriel made it clear. "Of course the house won't be in her name. If it's in your and my name and the mortgage is in Ivy's name, she will continue to pay the mortgage even after we divorce. Don't worry. Once we get custody and take the child, Ivy will definitely keep paying the mortgage," Gabriel concluded. "So their plan is to take out the mortgage in my name, divorce me, take the child, and use that as leverage to make me keep paying the mortgage. That explains why they suddenly started pushing for a child and offered to take care of it." My shock turned to anger. I wasn't going to let Gabriel and his mother get their way. I started planning on how to turn the tables on them. First, I told them I would pay for the mortgage and had them visit various home builders and contractors to get an estimate. As I suspected, as they talked with the consultants, the layout and interior specs became increasingly luxurious, and the final cost shot up to nearly $400,000. I then pushed them further. "Now that the layout is decided, shouldn't we go look for furniture? It's hard to find pieces you really like," I suggested. As expected, Gabriel and his mother only browsed high-end furniture stores and kept buying, storing everything in the store's warehouse. About 4 months later, after they'd spent lavishly, Gabriel and his mother, who had been out during the day, called me to the in-laws' house. "Ivy, we've settled on the contractor and are happy with the quotation. So we just signed the construction contract. Can you now formally apply for the mortgage at the financial institution? And we need you to pay 10% as a down payment right away, Gabriel said. That's when I dropped the bomb. Sorry, I can't pay for the mortgage, I said. What? Gabriel exclaimed. Actually, I've bought an apartment in my name, I added. An apartment? What are you talking about? We decided to live here. Why, you took it and did it yourself, he asked, bewildered. You and your mom can live here, but I've decided that the baby and I are going to live in our own apartment, I replied calmly. What are you saying all of a sudden? Gabriel's mother interjected. With the apartment mortgage, I'm already paying nearly $1,000 a month, so I can't afford to pay for that too, I explained. At this point, Gabriel and his mother panicked. What are you talking about now? You agreed to pay for the mortgage. Yes, we've already bought furniture worth over $20,000. I replied, I know everything. Your plan to claim I'm a failure as a wife and mother, divorce me, get custody, and make me pay for the entire mortgage. When I said this, both turned pale but desperately tried to pretend to be ignorant. That's not possible. I know you've been a good mom, even if it's just for a short while, Gabriel stammered. I've heard you've been spreading rumors in the neighborhood. My daughter-in-law doesn't do anything around the house or for the child, even claiming I've been violent towards the child and you to make it easier to get custody, I continued. At this, his mother turned red and fell silent. Then I confronted Gabriel with the truth. You never showed me your pay stubs because you said you were embarrassed about your low salary, so I searched your room. I found last year's tax assessment notice. Your income was higher than mine. Now, what's that about? I asked demandingly. Well, actually, I have student loan repayments, he said hesitantly. Do student loans come from nightclubs? I retorted. What? What are you talking about? He asked, confused. I continued. I found a nightclub girl's business card and a bill from some shady company. Come back soon, Gabriel, it said. Gabriel gave in after I exposed all this. He had been smitten with a girl at that nightclub, spending over $11,000 a month there and giving her an allowance of $500. That's why he had no money for the rebuild. Next was his mother. I allowed you to work, but you never shared any of your earnings with me. Despite the considerable resources, I'm now broke. I've used up the inheritance. I thought if I got you divorced from Gabriel, I could get alimony. And if we got custody, I could get child support from you, she admitted. How short-sighted. My mother-in-law planned to use that child support, didn't she? How was she planning to raise the child? I immediately presented them with divorce papers and left the in-laws' house with my child. Then I went straight to a lawyer's office. I had informed him of everything in a conversation earlier in the day. Thanks to that, I was able to get a divorce with alimony, property division, and child support, especially with Gabriel's salary deception, which was close to marital fraud. My lawyer pushed hard, and I got a substantial amount in alimony. This has made the payments for my and my child's apartment much more manageable, and I'm very grateful to him. Meanwhile, Gabriel and his mother had to pay 10%, $40,000, as a cancellation fee for the construction contract. As for the furniture, they had gone crazy and ordered custom pieces, so they couldn't cancel and received a bill for over $20,000. Obviously, Gabriel didn't have that kind of money, and his mother had almost exhausted her inheritance, so they had to borrow to pay it off. Now they are living in the old mother-in-law's house that started to leak, leading a life of extreme poverty. I still get occasional messages from Gabriel, but I'm pretty sure they're just about borrowing money, so I completely ignore them. I'm Hannah, a 36-year-old woman and a wife. I lead a pretty lonely life as my husband, Aiden, is in the army. Yes, he's been deployed for quite some time, and let me tell you, military life isn't all about glamorous reunions and tearful farewells. It is about gaining resilience in these in-between moments. Now, Aiden is a courageous man with a quiet determination that I truly admire. During one of his calls home, he made an unusual request. Hannah, you should work on improving your relationship with my mom, he suggested. What are you talking about? I asked. You see, Grace hasn't been herself since Dad passed away. She feels very lonely, just like you did during my business trip. I've noticed it too. Maybe you and Grace could use each other's company a bit more, spend more time together. Aiden explained. Aiden, please, it's not going to be easy for all of us, I thought. I was well aware that things had been strained between Grace and me since the infamous wedding incident, or should I say the wine incident. Let me provide a bit of context. Our feud dates back to my wedding day. Picture the stress of planning, coordinating, and trying to keep my composure so I didn't come across as a complete lunatic, which deep down I certainly wasn't. I was attempting to relax before taking the plunge into marital bliss when Grace, my dear mother-in-law, seemed determined to push my buttons. She knew how to do it, having honed her skill to perfection. On that very day, she had an agenda, and it wasn't subtle at all. Her aim was to inject a bit of chaos into my life. Small, sneaky acts were her forte. I was preparing and eager to savor every moment before the solemn occasion when Grace's, with a grin that could only be described as devious, accidentally spilled red wine all over my pristine white wedding dress. Yes, red wine on a white dress. It was like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Of course, she claimed it was an accident, attributing it to her clumsy fingers and the nervousness of her baby growing up and getting married. But I knew better. That mischievous twinkle in her eyes gave her away. She did it on purpose. From that moment on, our relationship took a nosedive. It was as if a layer of trust had been peeled away, revealing the simmering tension beneath the surface. Every subsequent encounter was laden with passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled sarcasm. What used to be friendly exchanges had turned into a battlefield of snide remarks. It was utterly exhausting, to say the least. So naturally, I distanced myself from the situation. I had no interest in engaging in a feud, but because of my love for Aiden and the hurt in his voice, I reluctantly agreed to try and mend our strained relationship. I couldn't help myself. I just felt an overwhelming sense of sympathy for him. He'd been through so much trouble during his service, all that grueling training and sleepless nights. I knew I owed it to him, at the very least, to make an effort. Besides, it had been several years, and I hoped that Grace had done some growing up in the meantime. Well, if it's important to you, I'm willing to give it a shot. After all, I'm all about supporting each other, I said. That's my girl. I know it won't be easy, especially given your history, but who knows? Maybe you'll find you have more in common than you think, he replied. I'll keep an open mind, I promise. But just so you know, if she tries to pull any wine-spilling antics again, I'll have a serious talk with her. No more sabotage attempts, I swear, I promised. All right then, let's do this for you, for us, and even for Grace, he said, and continued. Thanks, Hannah. It means a lot to me, and I promise I'll make it up to you when I'm back. After Aiden and I had our heartfelt conversation about reconnecting with his mother, I plucked up the courage to contact Grace. I knew it wouldn't be a walk in the park given our history, but I was determined to make an effort for the sake of my husband and the overall family atmosphere. To my dismay, Grace's response was as passive-aggressive as I had expected. Aiden had a stern talk with me about my treatment of you, she admitted reluctantly. I'll try to tolerate you more, the mother-in-law added. The emphasis on the word try made it clear that this wasn't going to be a smooth journey, so we cautiously started spending more time together. It was a rocky start with tension so thick you could practically cut it with a knife. However, gradually, we began finding common ground, bonding over old family stories and shared experiences. Things were bearable, at least for a while, but then old Grace started showing her true colors again. It began subtly, those little jabs and digs that seemed to go unnoticed by everyone but me. A snide comment here, a passive-aggressive remark there. It was like a scene out of a high school drama. It was infuriating. It seemed like she couldn't help herself, and it was driving me to the brink of sanity. Months passed, and my frustration continued to mount. I was tired of pretending to be the nice girl who was trying so hard to make things work. I had had enough of the fake smiles and insincere conversations. I couldn't ignore the glaring issue any longer, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. So one day, I mustered my courage and made the decision to address Grace about her behavior. We were at her place, sipping on some tea that seemed more bitter than usual. As I searched for the right words, my heart raced a mile a minute. Eventually, I blurted out, Grace, I can't ignore the tension between us any longer. I thought we were making progress, but these constant jabs and digs are getting to me. Grace gazed at me with her practiced innocence, but I wasn't falling for it this time. I took a deep breath, my frustration turning into determination, and continued. You know exactly what I mean. Honestly, I'm tired of pretending. If we're going to make this work, we need to have an honest conversation. That's when things took a turn for the worse. Our conversation escalated into a full-blown argument, with each word growing more heated than the last. Our voices became louder, and it felt as though the tension in the room was suffocating me. I was anxiously awaiting my nosy neighbor to call the police, thinking a domestic dispute was unfolding. As the shouting persisted, it struck me how deep-seated the resentment truly was. This wasn't merely about a spilled glass of wine on my wedding dress anymore. It was about years of misunderstandings, miscommunications, and a reservoir of pent-up anger. In that moment, I realized that there was no going back to the way things were. Eventually, our argument subsided, leaving the room heavy with the weight of our words. I left Grace's place that day feeling drained but strangely liberated. We had finally let it all out, and while our exchange might not have been graceful or eloquent, it was undeniably real. In the aftermath, a mix of emotions washed over me: relief, sadness, and an oddly enlightening clarity. It became apparent that certain wounds ran too deep to heal with just a few tea sessions and polite conversations. After that tense argument with Grace, I was deep in thought, sitting in my living room, the weight of all that had transpired hanging heavily in the air. I had grown weary, fed up with the ceaseless tension and bickering. It felt as if the walls of our large house were closing in on me, suffocating me with the burden of memories and unresolved issues. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of loneliness that had taken up residence in every nook of our rented home. Aiden was still dutifully serving his deployment miles away, making the house feel emptier than ever. It served as a stark reminder of how much I missed him and how vast the distance between us had become. On top of the fallout with my mother-in-law, I felt even more isolated. I grew tired of constantly oscillating between being too far from those I loved and too close to those I didn't. So the notion of moving began to take root in my mind. Downsizing to a smaller place felt like a breath of fresh air. It wasn't solely about saving money, although that was undoubtedly a welcome benefit. The idea was to create a more manageable, cozy space that, most importantly, would be free from the constant anxiety caused by Grace. During one of our video calls, I broached the subject with Aiden. Surprisingly, he was quite receptive to it. At that point, I hadn't mentioned the conflict with Grace. Instead, I focused on the potential financial relief the move could provide us. But then, in his characteristically perceptive manner, he asked the question I had been avoiding. Hey babe, yes, part of me can't help but think that this also has something to do with a certain someone. Did you and my mom have another clash? Is she connected to your desire to move? He asked. I let out a sigh, feeling a mix of frustration and relief that he had brought it up. Yeah, it's partly about her, Aiden. I tried, really I did, but she's just so confrontational, you know? Every conversation with her feels like a battle, and I've reached my limit, I replied. Aiden nodded sympathetically on the screen. I understand, Hannah. You've made genuine efforts to bridge that gap, but if it's causing you this much stress, maybe it's time to prioritize your own well-being. I genuinely don't understand why my mom has such a strong aversion to you. I'll do what I can, but my hands are tied up here. I love you, and I want to support you as much as I can. If that means moving, then so be it, he concluded. And there it was, his unwavering support and understanding, just as I had come to expect from him. It wasn't about fleeing from the issue, but rather finding a solution that allowed both of us to breathe a bit easier. His words reassured me that it was okay to put myself first and seek a healthier environment where I could flourish without constantly feeling on edge. As our conversation continued, I felt a renewed sense of determination. Moving wouldn't magically solve all our problems, but it would be a step toward reclaiming my peace of mind. With Aiden by my side, even though he was miles away, I felt empowered to make decisions that would lead us to a more positive and fulfilling future. As I surveyed our living room, I allowed myself to imagine the possibilities of starting anew in a cozier space, one unburdened by the ghosts of unresolved conflicts. I was ready to take that leap, to create a haven where Aiden and I could find solace in each other's presence without the constant weight of the negativity that had marred our relationship with Grace. Fast forwarding about 3 months, I was comfortably settled into my new, stylish apartment. It had truly been a game changer, and the feeling of liberation from the old place with its negative energy was beyond compare. My 26th birthday was swiftly approaching, and I was filled with excitement. This would mark my first celebration in my new digs, and I was determined to make it memorable. Traditionally, I'd vacate my home the night before the party, allowing my friends and family to decorate it as a surprise. However, this year called for something different. Having such a small apartment meant that I couldn't host a grand party. Instead, my friends were already there, and we were kickstarting the festivities before our early flight the next day. It was a pre-trip hangout, crashing at my place before jetting off together. Laughter and lively chatter filled the living room as we geared up for our adventure. But of course, life has its way of introducing change. Amidst all the excitement, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Intrigued, I checked it out and the message read, "Call me now, something important to talk about." The message was concise and urgent, leaving me wondering what was happening. I discreetly separated from the group and made my way to my bedroom to call Grace. My heart raced with curiosity and concern. "Hello, Grace. What's going on?" I asked. "I've had enough of your behavior, Hannah. What the hell is wrong with you?" Her response was abrasive and direct. "Excuse me?" I retorted. "You heard me. What's your problem? Why do you insist on trying to make my son hate me?" She persisted. "Oh, I see. You're upset because I told your son the truth," I replied, finding her accusation absurd. "What truth?" she wondered. "You're being ridiculous, Grace. I don't have time to deal with you. I'm fed up with your bitterness. I don't care that you're unhappy. Just leave me alone and let me enjoy my birthday," I finished. Unable to bear it, she blurted out, "Speaking of that, I wanted to inform you that you won't be enjoying your birthday this year. You should thank me for the heads up." Confused and alarmed, I demanded, "What the hell are you talking about?" "Well, after not receiving an invitation this year, I felt a bit resentful, so I took it upon myself to contribute in my own way to make your birthday special. You see, I couldn't wait any longer. I broke into your home and destroyed everything. All the decorations, the furniture, everything is shattered. Come to think of it, I did you a favor because your friends did a terrible job at decorating this year. Honestly, it looked like a completely different person was living in that house," she stated with a smirk. My jaw dropped, shocked by Grace's audacious actions. I took a deep breath, my silence stretching out as I imagined Grace smirking on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, "Oh, it looks like I did my job and gave the birthday girl a great surprise. Happy birthday, Hannah. Hope you have a blast." I couldn't help but burst into laughter, which seemed to infuriate Grace. "Why are you laughing? What's so funny? You should be in tears right now," she puzzled. I managed to regain my composure. "Oh, Grace, you're quite the fool," I continued to giggle. "Excuse me?" she said in a confused voice. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Well, I'll admit one thing. You did manage to surprise me, that's for sure. I had no idea you could be so despicable, but you've made a colossal mistake, my dear," I continued. "Oh yeah? What's that?" Grace demanded. "That wasn't my house," I added. "Have you lost your mind or something?" she questioned, shocked. "No, Grace, but you soon will, once you realize you just broke into someone else's house and vandalized it," I uttered. I proceeded to reveal to Grace that I had moved 3 months ago. It was an unexpected revelation for her. The old house was history, replaced by a new occupant, Sheriff Adam, who was new to the area and planning to move in with his family. I had met him a couple of times and could already tell he was one of those genuinely nice guys focused on getting his new place ready for his family. As I explained all this to Grace, I sensed her mood changing. Panic began to set in, and she was starting to freak out. She had just realized that she had messed with the wrong person in a big way. Vandalizing an ordinary home was one thing, but taking on the new sheriff's house was a whole different level of audacity. I heard her shiver on the other end of the line, and I knew she was beginning to grasp the magnitude of her actions. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Oh my God, Hannah, what have I done?" I couldn't help but let out a chuckle, though it wasn't a joyful one. Well, Grace, you decided to mess with the sheriff's home. You're on your own with this one. I smirked. She began to cry and panic, begging me to help her fix the situation. She didn't even apologize for attempting to vandalize my home. She wanted me to reach out to the sheriff and tell him it was all a big misunderstanding. But seriously, this was just too much. Grace was facing the repercussions of her actions, and I had no intention of coming to her rescue. I had to stifle a laugh as she sobbed over the phone, lamenting that her life was ruined. I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for her, not even a tiny bit. She had played these games for years, and now it was time for her to reckon with the consequences. To me, it looked like justice was served. "Please, please help me," she pleaded desperately. I simply shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "Sorry, Grace. You got yourself into this mess, and I suggest you figure your way out. I won't be part of it. I will say, though, you've given me the best birthday present." I ended the call and let out a sigh of relief. Finally, I was done with Grace and her drama. It was time to move forward and live my life without the constant drag of her negativity. As I glanced around my cozy new apartment, I knew I had made the right choice in leaving the old place behind. The next day marked the beginning of my vacation with my friends. We were ready for fun and adventure, and I was determined to leave Grace's troubles far behind us. Throughout the trip, I ignored all of her calls. I had made up my mind that I was finished with her and her toxic behavior. During a break, I managed to reach my husband, Aiden, and filled him in on everything that had transpired with Grace. Understandably, he was upset with his mother for her absurd behavior. It seemed like she had finally crossed a line too far, and he was relieved that she was experiencing the consequences of her actions. While my friends and I enjoyed our vacation, I continued to receive updates from friends and acquaintances back home. They filled me in on Grace's predicament. It turned out that after all her wild antics, she had landed herself in a jail cell. The irony of it all was that she had no one to bail her out. It was like the universe was serving her a hefty dose of karma. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction hearing about Grace's situation. For so long, she had acted as if she could do as she pleased without facing any consequences. But now she was dealing with the consequences all on her own, having pushed away everyone who might have been willing to help her. While I was enjoying the sunshine with my friends, Grace found herself confined to a jail cell with no one to turn to. It felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. I relished the knowledge that I was now free from her toxic influence, no longer shackled by her manipulations and hurtful actions. As my vacation drew to a close, I returned home with a sense of renewal and refreshment. The chapter of my life involving Grace was firmly closed, and I was eager to move forward without her. It was an empowering sensation, knowing that I had taken charge of my own happiness and left behind the negativity that had held me back for far too long. Life continued to progress, and I dedicated myself to cultivating positive relationships and surrounding myself with people who genuinely cared about me. Aiden and I grew stronger than ever, united in our commitment to creating a happy and healthy life together. As for Grace, she had ultimately reaped what she had sown, and it was a very important lesson that will remain in her memory for a long time.